Our journey in Scandinavia with the 45 adventurers was a wonderful experience in September 1996. About 20 also went to St. Petersburg, Russia, and were delighted with that city. About 1,000 scenes are edited from 18 hours of videotape for this production. We try to show important activity and keep the action going to hold your interest. Background music is from Peer Gynt by famous Norwegian composer Edvard Grieg. We'll look first at more than 200 photos from the tour, and video will follow. The word that seems to describe St. Petersburg best is monumental. Mile after mile of enormous museums, palaces, and other buildings greeted our eyes. We were especially dazzled by the golden statues at the famous Peterhof Palace, about 200 of them. And then by many rooms full of art in the huge Hermitage Museum. This is the museum and the square nearby. Statues of military leaders on horses were everywhere, as well as sculptures standing alone and on columns and doors and walls. Russian nesting dolls were a popular souvenir item. The magnificent domes of the Church of Our Savior will remain in our memory forever. We were entranced by the ballet dancers at the Alexandrinsky Theater. This is one of 3 musical performances we heard in the city, which is rich in culture. We crossed the Neva River several times and also walked around the area near the Nevsky Palace. This was during our last day in St. Petersburg. On the way to the airport, we were able to visit the Russian War Memorial and admire the statuary there. This is a memorial commemorating World War II. Our first stop off the bus in Helsinki was in a square with a large church nearby and statues in the center. Boats on the waterfront, and then more statues, and towering church spires loomed in our view. A church near our hotel is now a museum. This art is in the area near the market. These unusual metallic sculptures honor the great composer Sibelius. Finland lost many of its young men during the war, and we saw their graves at a memorial cemetery. A church built in massive rocks is another tourist attraction. The group also toured the former studio and home of architect Eero Saarinen. It was a rainy night when we walked around downtown, and we saw some interesting figures and shops in a huge underground mall. Then from the top of our hotel, we saw Helsinki at sunset. The beautiful Little Mermaid greeted us by the sea at Copenhagen. We saw more towering buildings, soaring fountains, historic churches, and guards on the alert as we toured the city. City Hall Square is a focal point of many activities downtown. We heard street music in the square and along the Stragat, where we strolled along to see the shops. Then we enjoyed the boats on a canal and refreshments, of course, in the open air at Nijhaven. We went to the Tivoli Park to dine with our friendly tour group, also heard a famous jazz band, and admired the fountains and its buildings at night. This is the Gefeien Fountain, which we thought was beautiful, as well as a historic St. Albans church nearby. Walking on, we saw more art, including a dragon's head at a restaurant. This psychedelic art is on buildings in Christiania, a community where people smoke hash openly and defy government control. North of Copenhagen, we saw the castle that inspired Shakespeare when he wrote Hamlet. Then the bus took us to Frederiksborg Castle, which is spectacular at the least. We admired gilded ornamentation, beautiful stained glass, and classic paintings on the walls and on the ceilings. As well as porcelains. The golden adornments of this ceiling amazed us all. This big ferry then took us overnight to Oslo. Our tour at Oslo included a park filled with Gustav Vigeland statues. These portray people of all ages to illustrate a theme termed the circle of life. It is a stunning display that has a powerful impact on viewers. The fountains also incorporate more sculptures. A variety of landscape and human art was shown at the State Museum. Then we took a leisurely walk around the city. Unusual sculptures, the expected troll, and a unique circular fountain were seen. More palatial buildings were seen on several streets not far from downtown. And we explored a hilltop fortress where Norwegians fought off the Nazis. And then had a final view of the Oslo waterfront. The Norway countryside offers an endless series of picture postcards. On the bus from Oslo to Ulvik, we viewed a glacier and lake, as well as roads with snow sticks to guide winter drivers. Large rocks are thrown from hillsides by trolls, according to Norwegian folklore. Aerial views of the glacier and mountains were seen from a seaplane operated from the Brakenes Hotel in Ulvik, which is seen here. Many mirror image views of shoreside houses were captured as we continued our sightseeing by boat, bus, train, and plane. At Utne, we saw ancient houses with sod roofs and historical displays at the Hardanger Museum. Some kids were picking berries on the hillside, which had a marvelous view of the lake. A sculpture of logs and bricks called Stream's Nest was seen before we began climbing the hairpin turns to the top of Osa Mountain. What a view we had from there. This was part of our wilderness tour. On the road in the morning, we had a shopping stop at Voss, where the fog hung over the water and hillside. Then we were on the water again on Sonja Fjord, the longest and deepest fjord in Norway. We had lunch at Flom, and then took its famous train up the mountains and through many tunnels. Views along the way included a valley far below and a waterfall where we stopped. We switched to another train to go into Bergen. Varicolored waterfront buildings and historic stone churches were seen in a walking tour of Bergen. This troll guarded a store entrance. We took a funicular up a mountain to view the city below and then walk its wooded trails. Back down below, we saw a worm's eye view of tall buildings and a fountain that highlights a park in Bergen's central area. The outdoor market near our hotel was a popular shopping and gathering place. At sunset, we saw Johannes Church and the glistening faces of buildings by the waterfront. We flew to Stockholm and went by bus to its city hall, which also is an impressive museum. The group took a walk in Gamla Stan, the name for the Old Town section with its narrow streets. We also saw a statue of St. George and the Dragon. At the Vasa Museum, we saw a huge ship that was underwater for 333 years before it was raised and restored. A tour by boat went through canals and locks to offer new views of the city. It is built on 14 islands that are connected by bridges. On the way home, we saw Old Town again and bought some Swedish glass items. Going into the countryside, we saw more art at Skokloster Monastery. Then the ancient ruins and new church at Sigtuna. This is a picturesque town with interesting shops and a waterfront park. We went on to Uppsala to tour its tall cathedral. Its stained glass windows rise over the tombs of royalty. Nearby at the university, we found 6 ancient rune stones. The Vikings created these with coded messages, and they also are found in North America. Our tour concluded with a long flight from Helsinki to New York City, and we viewed glacier-covered mountains as we flew over Greenland. Previewed by 100 photos in the next 9 minutes, with music by the bands in the background. The only cloudy skies we encountered were on our first day in Barcelona. We walked all around this fascinating city for 3 days. Here you see its busy port area on the Mediterranean Sea. The Condis Hotel was a gathering place for many cruisers. A maritime museum is a point of interest on the waterfront, and the old port was rebuilt and now is a marina for many boats. A statue of Columbus is silhouetted against the sunset here. The National Art Museum overlooks the city atop Mount Juic. This sculpture group was near the Hilltop Amusement Park, where a Ferris wheel was among the rides to enjoy. By day, we saw Antoni Gaudi's famous Casa Mila on Gracia Street, and at night we saw his Casa Betillo on the same street. Gaudi also designed the Sagrada Familia Cathedral. It was begun 115 years ago and is still far from completion. The spires of the cathedral soar high above the landscape. The Arch of Triumph is at a park that goes to the zoo, and Barcelona's Gothic cathedral dates back 5 centuries and is resplendent with carvings and statues outside and inside. This view is of the columns that rise to its dome. Tall buildings tower over narrow streets in the city's old Gothic quarter. A piano-playing frog was seen on Las Ramblas, where people stroll until early morning hours from Catalunya Square to the waterfront. Music, art, sidewalk cafes, and vendors' booths enliven this area. This building was on our walk up the mountain at Tibidabo. Then it was time to board the Marco Polo to cruise the Mediterranean. Our first stop was at Cannes on the French Riviera. Some cruisers also went on tours to Nice and Monte Carlo. Along the waterfront at Cannes is a long, narrow park where flower displays and shops are plentiful, and carousel rides bring out families with children. The Riviera is renowned for its popular beaches, as well as freedom to go topless while getting a tan. The old section offered narrow streets and interesting shops. This unusual building was at the wedge of a busy intersection. The famous film festivals are held in this building at Cannes. A sculpture in butter symbolizes the jazz we heard on the cruise. The glories of ancient Rome were seen on our next stop. Our walking tour took us to the Spanish Steps and then to Trevi Fountain, which reaps a harvest of coins from tourists. Vegetable and fruit markets were found along our journey. The monument to Victor Emmanuel is like a wedding cake design. A few columns still stand tall in the ruins of the Roman Forum, and the Colosseum is braced up to preserve its grandeur. The floor of the Colosseum is gone, but the catacombs remain. We were awed by the size of this ancient amusement center. Constantine's Arch nearby dwarfs the people viewing it. We also found preservation going on at St. Peter's Basilica. 150 statues are seen in the plaza. One can imagine hearing those Roman orators of long ago. A brilliantly sunlit window highlights the altar at St. Peter's. Castle Sant'Angelo is now a museum in the Vatican City area. Many bridges span the Tiber River as it wanders through Rome. Our group gathered near this fountain at Barberini Plaza. A visit to the ruins of Pompeii was next on our schedule. It's hard to believe that ashes from erupting Mount Vesuvius buried a city of 20,000 people in just a few minutes. Excavation of the ruins began 15 centuries later, and many structures were found well preserved, as well as bodies of victims of the volcanic eruption, and even art on the walls of various buildings. 8 loaves of bread were found in the oven of this bakery. Sorrento is a prime resort city on the scenic Italian coast. Traffic in the city square included many bikes and scooters. We found some bargains in shops along back streets. A bus climbs winding streets to reach this hilltop city. Our next stop was at Naxos on the sea at Sicily. Tour members also took buses to Taormina on the mountaintop. Small boats lined up along the shore in the harbor, and floral beauty was found all around town. Taormina is in the distance behind this palm tree. And we enjoyed this view while strolling along the beach, where some topless bathers also enjoyed a liberal dress code. Painted marlins danced on a restaurant facade, and cheerful ceramic art reflected the Sicilian sunshine. The Marco Polo waited at anchor near the beach, and we had another view of the harbor as we returned to the ship. The white buildings of Santorini are like jewels on a hilltop. From harborside, we chose to ride cable cars up the hill, and a panorama of the town, Fira, greeted our camera. A glistening cathedral stood out in the landscape, and we trudged along streets and stairs for a closer look. The altar inside portrayed Madonna and Child. Traffic police helped bikers park in the marketplace. From the far side of town, we looked back to where we had started. The dome of another cathedral provided inspirational art. Donkeys took us back downhill on a memorably jerky ride. This big sailing ship cruised alongside as we left the island. At Athens, we saw the birthplace of Western civilization. We left the ship at Piraeus and journeyed by bus to Athens. We were surrounded by other tourists as we climbed the Acropolis. Looming above other structures on the hilltop is the Parthenon. The columns remain, but the roof of the building is gone. This temple is highlighted by the Porch of the Maidens. A statue made of ragged glass plates was near the Hilton Hotel. Our tour bus stopped so we could view the changing of the guards. We saw these fountains while walking around the city. Greek cuisine, music, and dancing were featured at the old stables, and various costumes were seen during a 2-hour show. The music of a virtuoso balalaika player was outstanding. The centerpiece of our hotel lobby was a splendid chandelier, and here we are, Bob and Ruth, posing by the cathedral downtown. Then we strolled the old section and admired its architecture, and found some souvenir statue bargains in shops along the way. We climbed Philippapu Hill for more views of the Acropolis. This is the panorama seen from the top of the hill. A new perspective was gained on the Parthenon. The monument to Philippapu crowns the hill we climbed. A sea of buildings in Athens is seen from that vantage point. We admired Hadrian's Arch on our evening walk in Athens. Our Mediterranean adventure lingered in our minds as we soared above the clouds on the return flight. The video that follows will capture sounds and sight from our journey, as well as jazz we enjoyed on ship and other musical moments.